How would you reply to this question in English? How are you? What's your first reaction, your instinct? What's the first thing that springs to mind? Let me know in the comments below, because in this lesson, we're going to talk about some ways that British people really do reply to this question. Hello, you wonderful people. Welcome to English Right Now. My name is Roy, your British English teacher. And as I've said, today we're going to look at some more natural ways that British people will reply to this question. So this lesson was sort of inspired from many, many years of teaching. Now, I remember quite often I would teach students of all levels, from beginner right up to advanced. And when I went into kind of A1, A2 level, the sort of pre-intermediate levels, you would go in there and say, "Good morning, everybody. How are you?" And the whole room would reply in the same way. "I'm fine, thank you. And you?" And it was almost like a robotic response, like an automatically triggered response. I say, "How are you?" And they would reply, "I'm fine, thank you. And you?" And particularly note that "and you" part. And it was really fascinating because it was almost like Pavlov's theory in action, because these students had almost become programmed to reply in that specific way. Without thinking, they would just reply, "I'm fine, thank you. And you?" And what was really fascinating is sometimes these lower level students, one would say, "How are you?" The other would reply, "I'm fine, thank you. And you?" And they would reply, "I'm fine, thank you. And you?" And it felt like they were going to get stuck in a loop forever, asking each other, "And you, and you, and you." And the interesting thing about that is quite often British people don't just say, "I'm fine." In fact, "I'm fine" isn't the most positive of responses. We can talk about that in another lesson. So that is why I want to talk about this today. And if you did say, "I'm fine, thank you," and maybe the words "and you" came to mind as well, do please let me know in the comments, because this not only stuck with the elementary and the pre-intermediates. I found students of all levels, once they'd learned this, "I'm fine, thank you, and you," they would say it automatically throughout their levels. So today we're going to break that pattern, and we're really going to talk about some more natural ways. Now, in British English, if somebody asks you, "How are you?" quite commonly, you will hear the words "not bad." Not bad. Not bad means good. Sometimes we kind of add an extra word and say, "Yeah, not too bad." Not too bad also means good. Now, I know that this reply sounds negative, and I get probably a lot of you going, "Roy, this is the most typically British response." Yes, it is. That's why I'm teaching it first. So quite commonly, British people say "not bad" or "not too bad." Now, what's really interesting about these 2 or 3 words, depending on which one you use, is it relies heavily on your tone of voice. For example, if I say "not bad," it's kind of a bit dismissive, and it means, yeah, I'm okay. I'm not great. I'm okay. Not bad. Yeah. Not bad means kind of just, I'm okay. I'm fine. Fine is an interesting word there. But if I say kind of, yeah, not bad, with that kind of rising intonation, it's kind of implying that things are pretty good. They are great. So depending on your tone of voice, you can go from being not bad to not bad, which almost adds that element of surprise. So you could say, "How are you?" Not bad, or "not too bad." And an alternative to this that I really love is "not too shabby." This one's slightly humorous. Shabby means kind of a bit old and tired. So if you're saying, "I'm not too shabby," it basically means, yeah, I'm good. Yeah, not too shabby, or not too shabby. In other words, I'm good. These are pretty typical responses, although "not too shabby," not as common. It's a little bit more humorous, and it tends to get used a little bit less. Another really common response to "how are you?" is "all right." All right. But all right just means okay, nothing great. All right. One thing you'll notice is that I've already used the word "all right," as in it's okay, not too shabby, not bad. They're all quite downbeat. And this is something really fascinating. In British culture, we quite often play it down. We either say it's, okay, average. It's never amazing, and it's never terrible. Another one, which is slightly negative, is "so-so." "How are you?" "So-so." It's nothing great. That one is slightly on the negative side. So if you hear a British person say, "Yeah, so-so," it's not the best day of their life, I'm not going to lie. Now, one question that I get asked a lot is it okay to say "I'm good" instead of "I'm well"? British people say "I'm good" all the time. "How are you?" "I'm good." "I'm good. I'm in a good state of being." It's kind of saying my life is good. It's okay. Now, if you're talking about your health, Technically, you should say I'm well because that's the adverb and good is the adjective. But realistically, a lot of British people say I'm good. How are you? Good. It's a bit normal. It's a bit typical. It's not as exciting as some of the ones coming later in this video. But to be honest, a lot of British people standard just say not bad or they just say good. One really bizarre reply that I find that confuses students is, yeah. Just yeah. How are you? Yeah, you. It's almost dismissing the question, like I don't really want to answer. We'll talk about some of those a little bit later on. But some people just go, yeah, you. Like, everything okay? Yeah, you. They kind of just say yeah, which is a really weird reply when you think about it. Another one on the slightly negative side is same old, same old. How are you? Yeah, same old, same old. Anything new? Not really. Same old, same old. Same old, same old basically means nothing has changed in my life. There is nothing different in my life. It is just the typical life that I live. In other words, it's nothing special. It's nothing great. How are you? Yeah, same old, same old. Again, some of these replies seem a bit off in terms of what should be replied, but this is quite a typical response as well. And it just basically means, yeah, everything's normal, nothing great, nothing to talk about really. You? And at this point, I will say, let me know in the comments below, which one of these is your favorite? Which one are you going to start adding? Because they're going to get better and better, or some of them are actually going to get worse and worse. But some of them are really, really cool that will give you extra vocabulary to answer this question. So you're not just saying good, all right, and not bad, or fine all of the time. Next one is a really, really British one. I have to say, this is probably the most British one. Well, actually, there's some more coming. But how are you? Can't complain. Can't complain. This is a really bleak, sad response, but it's basically saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong in my life. Can't really complain. It sounds really negative. And like I say, British people often play it down. They often don't talk about their life. They don't say it's terrible. They don't say it's great. It's kind of always in that kind of middle bracket of it's all right. You know, I can't complain. This sounds like pretty negative, but it's basically saying my life is fine. It's all right. See, I use that word fine there, but my life is all right. Nothing great, nothing special. I can't complain, which is actually surprisingly quite positive. And again, if you use that upwards intonation, yeah, can't complain, it sounds much more positive. And as with most of these replies, yeah, so, it almost sounds like you're a bit surprised that life is okay. So they sound far more positive. It's all about intonation on a lot of these. So there is a key difference between can't complain and yeah, can't complain. Mustn't grumble is another kind of one that means can't complain. And this one could imply that something is wrong, but they don't really want to talk about it. So yeah, well, you know, mustn't grumble. But it could also mean the same as can't complain. Like there's nothing in my life that I can complain about. So I suppose it's okay. Nothing great. Not amazing. British people rarely say amazing unless they're being sarcastic. We're going to get onto that one because we're going to get worse before we get better. Next one is could be worse. My goodness, this is a typically kind of bleak British response, isn't it? How are you? Yeah, could be worse. In other words, my life is not good, but there's always worse. Jeez, that is, wow, that is a reply. So this is a pretty typical response. It's a bit downbeat. It is a bit negative. Could be worse. Even when we put that intonation in there, which makes it sound a bit more positive, it still sounds pretty negative. Yeah, could be worse. It still sounds like the life isn't great, but yeah. Surviving is one that I've used in the past. How are you surviving? So surviving implies that there is some kind of problem or negative situation or danger that we need to take into account, and we are barely getting by. We are surviving, we are not really living. We are going from day to day in a kind of negative situation. And this is actually one I've used myself, if I'm totally honest. I was at a job and I was working there. And every day this guy would say to me, how are you? He was a guy from Portugal, lovely chap. He said, how are you? And I'd say, yeah, surviving. And then after a while, he started saying, how are you? Surviving? And then I realized maybe it's time that I leave that job. Because if you start saying surviving all the time, it's not exactly positive. But this is another British one. It's kind of funny, but also kind of negative. It implies you're not really enjoying life. You're just going from day to day, barely, just breathing and getting by. This one, fair to middling, is something somebody said to me this morning. A dear friend of mine, who I hope is watching this video, a dear friend of mine, I said to you, how are you? Fair to middling. This one's quite humorous, but again, it's got that negative, it is average, it is just bog standard. There is nothing great about my life. There's nothing bad. There's nothing good. It is down the middle. So it is a very kind of average sort of life. How are you? Fair to middling. This implies that somebody's not having the best of times. It is an average time. Now, of course, my friend was using that with me quite humorously. He was having a joke. Oh, how are you? Fair to middling. And then we talked about how funny it was that British people spoke like this. Been better is another one that basically says, yeah, life isn't the worst, but I have been better than now. Again, it's pretty bleak, and we're getting towards the negative ends. So if you want to be a bit negative and you don't want to really say, my life is great, my life is good, my life is okay, if you want to say it's pretty bad, you could just say, yeah, it's been better. In other words, there is something wrong, and I would advise you that if a British person uses a word like been better, that potentially you should not dig any deeper. Because they're about to unload on you the real negatives of their life. Oh, it's been better, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah. Terrible is a very rare thing to say. If somebody says this directly and straightly and in an honest way, how are you? Terrible. You know that somebody is going through something severe. Like I say, we normally don't really overly express our emotions. So if somebody says terrible, wow, this is pretty bad. If somebody says, oh, terrible, it could be a bit of a joke depending on the pitch of their voice, the intonation. But normally, if you say terrible, this could be really, really negative. Could be better. It's getting slightly more positive. Could be better. It means it's not great. Could be better, but it's not the worst. It's slightly better than been better, I would say, but could be better. Basically means, yeah, life could be better than this, but it's not the worst. Again, slightly negative. If you are having a really rough time, a British person may say, struggling. How are you? Struggling. This means you're finding life really difficult. And if somebody says snowed under, it means they're really, really busy, often snowed under with work. So, how are you? Snowed under. If a British person doesn't want to tell you how they're feeling, they might just say, don't ask. Don't ask basically is a way of just saying, shutting down the conversation. How are you? Don't ask. You have asked, but they're telling you, don't go any further. I don't want to talk about it. That's it. It's done. British person there is putting basically the stops on the conversation. How are you? Don't ask. You? Fair to middling. So they may ask you. Again, if they don't ask you, just leave it be. So do let me know your favourite and which one you're going to use in the future. Maybe you want to avoid those kind of negative ones. But now we're going to talk about a humorous one. And that is, all right until I saw you. Sometimes just shorten down, all right till I saw you. All right till I saw you. So it's basically saying, my life was good until I saw you. Until you spoke to me, my life was good. Now this one can be a bit of British humour. The kind of British sarcasm going, yeah, I was all right until I saw you. If they sound a bit more genuine, yeah, they don't really want to speak at all. Or something you've done has upset them. They may just be in a bad mood. But probably, all right until I saw you, it's going to be quite humorous. How are you? All right until I saw you. And I often find if a British person is overly positive, it possibly means they're being sarcastic. Now, not always. Never been better. Could be quite genuine. But if you say, how are you? And they deliver it in quite a flat tone, yeah, never been better. That probably implies that something catastrophic has happened in that person's life. Like I say, British people aren't really overly positive with their responses. The most positive we kind of go to is not too bad or good. But if a British person says, never been better, with a kind of upwards intonation, then maybe they really are enjoying life. But if they say it quite flatly, never been better. That doesn't imply something good is happening. And the same would go for words like splendid, amazing, fantastic. These are words that I tend to use when I'm being sarcastic. How are you? Yeah, fantastic. How are you? Amazing. How are you? Splendid. And you. And there's kind of an anger behind those. And I very rarely do hear British people using these words in a kind of genuine way. How are you? Fantastic. It sounds a little bit exaggerated for a British person to reply like that. Let me know which one of these replies was your favourite. Let me know which ones you're going to start using. Let me know, how are you? And if you want to learn more about how British people really speak, check out this video on slang versus idioms. But for me today, I just want to say thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next lesson.